Test.
Okay. We're calling to order the September 7th meeting of the Planning Commission. We will start with item 1, City Attorney Conference with Legal Counsel. Do I need a report, or do I need to say something for?
So Chair Austin, you may ask if there's any public comment on the closed session, and if there is no public comment on closed session, you can adjourn and the commission can meet in closed session.
Does that require opening and closing the public hearing?
Public comment, it's not a public hearing, just public comment on closed
okay.
session.
Thank you. Are there any public comments for item 1, closed session? Seeing none, we will adjourn the meeting to closed session and return. Is that correct? Covered it all? Thank you. We're calling to order the September 7th meeting, the regular meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission. This evening, we will start, hold on just a moment. So, tonight, this is the regular agenda of the September 7th meeting of the West Sacramento Planning Commission. We'll go ahead and start. Thank you. Tonight's agenda is available on the counter along with requests to speak cards. As a reminder to everyone that requests to speak card should be completed and turned into the clerk to my right prior to the completion of any staff presentation. For those speakers wishing to speak on items not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of this commission, please write the item number on your card. Please note that all speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each. Please note that this meeting is being recorded, so all speakers, in order to be recognized, must be called on by the chair and come forward to the microphone right here. Speaking in public may cause some individuals to be uncomfortable, so everyone is asked to be professional and respectful at all times. Now that will start with a Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Harvey, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Planning Commission met in closed session, and we'll hear a report from the city attorney about that.
We have no reportable action, Chair Austin.
Thank you. Moving on to general administrative functions. Item A, presentations on the public on matters not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of this commission. Please note that this commission is prohibited by law from discussing issues not on the agenda brought to them at this time. Is there a Marcia Flamingo who would like to comment on something not on the agenda? Okay, thank you. Oh, one moment. Could you push that button at the base of the microphone?
That one?
Perfect, thank you so much.
I'm Marcia Fiamingo. I live in the River Landing neighborhood of West Sacramento, and 2 weeks ago we submitted a petition to the Planning Commission and to City Hall to have a revision of the emergency traffic plan through our Lassen Street off of Mojave. We still have not heard back from either the Planning Commission or City Hall. The EIR for the Liberty development has been released, and we were notified that it would include a traffic study to estimate emergency vehicle response times between the local firehouse and our neighborhood, both through our neighborhood and through a more amenable plan. We have yet to receive that, and the EIR does not include it. So I'm wondering if there is a point in time where we can expect that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. We are prohibited by law from discussing that. However, I will ask that staff follow up with you, and I'll also ask that staff report back at the next regular Planning Commission to confirm when and whether that has happened.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other items not on the agenda that people would like to discuss at this time? Seeing none, moving to item B, correspondence and staff communications from the Planning Commission Secretary, Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you, Chair Austin. I do have a few items to note for you tonight. First of all, you should have 2 memos in front of you, one on item number 6 from Kathy Allen, and then a little more robust memo from myself regarding item number 4. And also tonight, I'd also like to report on 2 items from last night's City Council. Planning Commission over our last few meetings heard a couple of use permit items and municipal code changes pertaining to some cannabis uses. City Council did do second reading on those ordinances that were your commission considered and made recommendations to them, and so now those ordinances would become effective in 30 days. And then lastly tonight, we are expecting some discussion regarding item number 4, which is presently listed on your consent agenda, so we would ask that item be put on regular agenda rather than being on consent tonight. And that concludes staff communications.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. I think we'll bring that up when the consent agenda comes up. Moving on to item C, disclosures of ex parte communications. Planning commissioners should disclose any communications they have had on the agenda at this time. So I'll start on my left with Commissioner Liebig.
Thank you, Chair Austin. I have had communications with the applicant or applicant representatives for number 4.
And Commissioner Vu, it's on.
No.
I can enter report. I have had ex parte communications with the applicant and stakeholders for item number 4. And I've had ex parte communications with residents near the property described in item number 6.
Thank you, Chair Austin. I've had ex parte communications for item number 4 as well.
No communication.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the consent agenda, there are 4 items. Is there any request to pull any of them?
Madam Chair, I actually would like to pull numbers 3 and 4.
I have items 3 and 4 pulled. Is there any desire to pull items 1 or 2, or can we take that up together? Seeing none, consent agenda will include items 1 and 2. I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
A motion by Commissioner Castillo,
I'll second.
and a second for Commissioner Liebig. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Any abstention? The 2 motions carry. Moving on to the regular agenda items, we will start with number 3, consideration of the Washington Specific Plan minor deviation at 317 3rd Street. Mr. Tilley?
Sorry, Mr. Tilley.
Does the commission desire a formal presentation on this item, or do you have a
This
question?
I was not requesting a formal presentation, Madam Chair. The reason I wanted to call this out is just I wanted to just make a simple comment on
Yeah,
this
sure.
before we move it. This is a unique sign. It's a very unique building. It's a very, very old building. We're talking about the firehouse over in Broderick. And I thought the city did a fabulous job, along with the property owner, in developing the sign. My concern is that the sign not be too far away from the building, so we don't set a precedent for pole signs, which we have vowed to not allow. So if we can snug that up to the building, I think that would be great. That is my only comment.
Great, thank you.
So I'll respond to that. It is under evaluation with respect to the foundation of the firehouse. The intent is to get it as close as possible, but it could be that it'll have to be about 5 feet away. But it'll still be within the fenced seating area. They don't want to compromise the foundation of the actual firehouse.
Okay. I think I'll leave that
So-
up to city staff. The intent is just to, of course,
But you're
avoid a pole sign.
correct.
Right. Okay.
All right, any motion to?
With that, Madam Chair, I move approval of.
Chair
item-
Austin, because
Yes.
we did pull this from consent, I'd request that you ask for public comment before taking any motions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any public comment on item number 3? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move approval of item number 3.
I have a motion from Commissioner Liebig,
Second.
a second from Commissioner Lepore. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Any abstentions? Item 3 carries. That will be moving on to item 4, consideration of zoning administrator decision regarding nonconforming uses at 1781 South River Road. Mr. Tilley.
Yes, thank you, Chair Austin. I'll be presenting this item tonight. The zoning administrator has referred this item to you for your consideration this evening. It is regarding an issue of nonconforming use at 1781 South River Road in the Pioneer Bluff district of the city. As I stated, this is located in Pioneer Bluff, which is an area of focus for the city and has been for many decades since the first general plan, with the goal of trying to deindustrialize, this area over time. The particular property is comprised of 2 parcels, one small parcel that is undeveloped, and then a much larger adjacent parcel that has the existing office building that you may have seen if you've driven by. The general plan designation of this area is riverfront mixed use. and then the zoning is waterfront. This is the general plan and zoning combination for all of Pioneer Bluff. This property over the years has been used for a pilot car company that dated back to the mid to late 1980s. A truck and trailer rental business has been in there, originally under the name of Rollins, and which was subsequently bought out by Penske. Penske operated in there, and then much more recent times, Clark Pacific, which has their primary property pretty much right across the street from here, did operate this for a contractor's office and yard space. Under the waterfront zoning, all of these uses have been considered non-conforming into that district. And this property also previously included an acre and a half that was leased from the city of lease which has since terminated. I'm going to go through several aerial photos just to try to get us back from at least the first aerial photos that we had available and then getting us up to present times. The property is generally in the middle of the photo. The existing office building is there just south of the northerly tank farm. The city's former sewer treatment plant and facility is to the south. South River Road goes through the middle, and then the Sacramento River is on the east. This is when Rollins was occupying the property back in 1993. Fast forward 5 years, Rollins is still there. Their trucks, the office building, and other related things remain visible in 1998. Fast forward now to 2002. Penske has since, purchased Rollins, and now they're continuing to operate a similar business, which was defined on their business license and under the city zoning ordinance as truck and trailer leasing and repair. Moving forward, August 2005. These are all same images from Google, which we routinely review for property history almost on a daily basis. Penske is still occupying the property. Various types of vehicles and trailers are visible on the site. Fast forward 2 years into 2007. This is nearing the end of the time when Penske was at this property, and you can see how there's very few remaining trailers on site, and the existing office building is remaining in place. Now moving forward in 2008, this is when Clark Pacific first began to utilize this property. They were leasing it from the underlying owner. Clark primarily took possession of this property because they had two very large projects that we're working on. First was what became Levi Stadium, and then the next one became the new Apple Park headquarters in Cupertino, both Bay Area projects that Clark was very heavily involved with. So move forward about a year. Clark is continuing to operate the property. You can see some of their equipment in the aerial photo. Very few trucks, however, in this photo. So continuing, fast forward a couple more years, Clark Pacific is still occupying this property. You can see some of their laydown area and some other equipment, and then Clark was also making use of the office building for some of their architectural and engineering staff. To the lower left of this property, you can see some of Clark's primarily properties are where Clark has been out there for a long time. So now here's this, as aerial photo technology improves. Here we're in July 2014. You can see a lot of the rebar and other equipment that was made and used in those two big projects. So Clark is continuing to operate this property as a contractor's office and yard. And then moving right along, they're really busy. July 2015, you can see a lot of their equipment there. However, fast forward to July 2016, a little over a year ago, the property is now essentially empty. There's no more equipment, no more trucks, no more materials visit. By then, these projects had largely been completed. Levi Stadium was open by then, and then the Apple headquarters would open only a little less than a year from here. And also at this time, it's our understanding that at the end of June 2016 is also when Clark's lease of the property concluded. And so now to present day, Google just flew over this within the last few days, because this is a September 2017 aerial of the site, still showing that there's no use in the yard space of this property. So the matter before you tonight is the property owner is interested in leasing this property for a 24/7 fuel delivery business, pulling tanker trucks. And to staff's determination, based on our definitions in our municipal code, this will constitute a truck yard, which is not a permitted use in the waterfront zone. Presently only permitted on a conditional basis in our heavy industrial and waterfront industrial zones. The applicant is requesting approval of this as a continuing nonconforming use of the property. It's our understanding that part of the reason why this company wishes to go to this particular property is they want to expand their operations, and they currently serve the Buckeye property that is across the street and adjacent to this. So just to go back a little bit, so this is when, back when Penske was in there doing the truck leasing in 2002, demonstrate some trailers and some vehicles. These are all, vehicles, some of which could have been rented by, average persons for like moving vans, and some of them were commercial vehicles to be used in that manner. We want to try to describe the sort of more context here, and I want to show this as a basis. So for Penske trucks, many of them were of this nature. These are ones that, individuals can rent. Some of them were larger, but many of them were this way. And then I went on the Fuel Delivery Services website earlier and pulled this photo. It shows many of the types of vehicles that their business uses and how they use them. In our minds, these are very different types of vehicles and types of uses. Also, as proposed, the fuel delivery service business is 24/7. We've noted on here that Penske, both here when on their Evergreen location, is not a 24/7 operation. We pulled this right off their website yesterday. It shows they're closed on Sundays, have fairly normal business hours Monday to Friday, and then only 4 hours Saturday morning. We also called Penske, their operation on Evergreen, and they stated to us that they had never been a 24/7 operation in West Sacramento, even when they had been on South River Road. So Clark Pacific, we stated, did occupy this property for approximately 8 years. At that time, it was considered to be a less intense replacement use for when Penske had been in there previously. As I stated, they occupied this property primarily because they got very busy with these two very large and significant projects. They did employ large trucks. These are the kind that needed pilot cars and also transportation permits from both the CHP and the city. And because of the size, those are ones that had to go on off-peak hours. And based on the permit data that we have and representatives from our police department here, those were approximately 40 trips in a given year. Not a 24/7 kind of operation, especially when it comes to trucks. So non-conforming uses are addressed, in our municipal code, and in generally terms, they may not be intensified. As stated, according to general plan, all uses are supposed to move in a conforming direction to the extent they're not already conforming already. For undeveloped properties, if the use ceases for a month, they may not be reinstated. And then for developed properties, ones with buildings on them, West Capitol Avenue and Central Business District, the time limit on that is 6 months, and then elsewhere in the city, it is 12 months. So our conclusions on this one for you tonight, and why we're making these recommendations, is that the proposed use is more intense than what has been there previously. And based on the fact that it is a truck yard, which is a separate defined use than our zoning ordinance, and is one that is allowed in much more limited areas of the city. Prior uses on the property were not 24/7. This provides an increased use in hazardous vehicles and hazardous substances, which is of great concern to both our police and our fire department. As I stated, truck uses are a more intense use under our zoning ordinance and the hierarchy of land uses. and that the use of the property has also ceased for the last 12 months as in the yard space, as evidenced by the aerial photos. So tonight, we are asking you to make a decision based on the zoning administrator's referral to you that the proposed use in front of you would be a more intense use than what has been there historically, and thus would not be consistent with our municipal code, and then would not be allowed. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
And just to clarify that you have other representatives from the city staff available, and I don't know if the city attorney would like to
Yes,
speak.
and I should note also the applicant does have a presentation for you as well.
Right. So who's available from the city to speak?
Our Director Hamilton is here, our city attorney, Mona Ibrahimi is here, and then also Sergeant Mark Marquez with the city's police department is here as well.
Great, thank you. Does city attorney have any comments at this point?
I do have a few points that I would like to make, but I would actually like to wait until
After
after
applicant.
questions and the applicant's presentation.
Great, thank you. So I'll turn to my commissioner. So as an order of business, I'll take questions from commissioners for city staff specifically, and then we will open the public comment period for the applicant to make a presentation. If there are any other comments from members of the public, and then we'll close the public comment period, offer opportunities for commissioners to make comments and questions, and then we'll move from there. So I think I'll start on my right with Commissioner Lepore, if you have any questions for city staff.
Not yet. I would actually like to wait till the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner?
I'll wait for the presentation as well.
Commissioner? Okay, great, thank you. So I have three requests to speak. It appears that possibly two are with the applicant, so we'll start with a presentation from the applicant. And then I believe that our only public comment at this point is from Scott Maddox. And then as you come forward, whether it's the applicant or other people, be sure to introduce yourself with your name and your affiliation. And Mr. Ramos, you know how to adjust that, right? It's a good height? Okay.
Good evening, Chairman Austin and members of the Planning Commission. I'm Dan Ramos with Ramp Enterprises, and we represent our.
Hold on one moment. Can we check if the mic is on? It should be glowing green.
There we go.
There we go.
Now it's on.
Thank
Okay.
you.
There again, Dan Ramos with Ramco Enterprises, representing the property at 1781 South River Road. And I'm here tonight to give some testimony, but a lot of it's going to be with our legal staff here and going over some of the legal points. We appreciate the opportunity to come forward and rectify this situation. We think it's a very simple solution. But what I really wanted to stress here tonight, and I also want to mention that I'm here along with a lot of our fellow property owners in the Pioneer Bluff area. We have Clark Cameron here from, Scott Maddox here from Clark Pacific, Dick Cunha from Clark Trucking, my cousin Kent Ramos here from Ramos Oil. So we got majority of the property owners are here, very interested in what happens here tonight. I wanted to just stress, I want to make sure everybody knows that we are very supportive of the redevelopment of the Pioneer Bluff area. We've been very active in that effort as property owners, and so we continue the effort. We believe we need to work out an opportunity for existing businesses to survive and be able to keep their buildings occupied during this transition period, since we have Buckeye terminals there setting the stage for the industrial uses. It's very difficult for us to keep our buildings leased. Now, and you'll hear a lot about that in terms of legality and stuff like that, but that's what we're trying to do, is work out a compromise. We'd love to be able to sit down and do that. I do want to correct a couple of things that David mentioned in his presentation. I want you to be very clear. Rollins Leasing was occupying the building up through 2005 to 2006 is when they made the Penske sale. Penske, yes, had the operation over on Evergreen already. They were established. There were two competing companies. Rollins Leasing did operate 24 hours, 24/7 back through 2004, 2005. When Penske bought them, obviously they had double operations, so yes, they didn't need to be 24/7, but Penske definitely was. Primarily, a lot of it was during heavy ag times, during the spring and fall planting, and in the springtime for planting, and in the fall harvest. They had a lot of customers that leased tractor rigs from them that they maintained for them in their fleet, so that really stepped up. So that, ag goes 24 hours, so we had a lot of operations there. We even at that time put a deal together with the city, leased the land next to us both on the north and the south to expand the yard expansion, put in a fuel island there to be able to service their customers 24 hours. So There was a 24-hour operation, I want to make that very clear. But when Penske took over, that's when they didn't need the 24 operation there and actually eventually moved out of there. And we went on to move to lease with Clark Pacific. So I just want to make that very clear. Also, our lease with Clark Pacific just expired here June 30th, not of 2017, not 2016. We had a legal agreement with Clark Pacific for them to operate their business however they see fit in terms of our lease up to June 30th. So they could have resumed operations for that yard space at any time during that lease commitment. We, as a landlord, we were committed to provide them with that activity at the building. So I wanted to make that very clear. Right now, I'd like to turn this over to Matt Kingsley from Taylor & Wiley and have him do a brief presentation. I think will really clarify what we're here to determine tonight. And what we're asking is that you reverse the determination of the zoning administrator and recognize the continued existence of the vested right at 1781 South River Road to conduct the nonconforming use of the truck fleet storage, maintenance, and dispatch. Thank you very much. Matt?
Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Austin. Matt Kiesling of Taylor & Wiley. I recognize that I did not have a speaker slip in, so I do have one filled out. I also have hard copies of a PowerPoint presentation that we'd like to go through to hand out to you as well, and I'll take them over to this side. I left the stack there for hard copies, just in case the commissioners would like to flip back and forth. So, I'm here tonight representing Ramco Enterprises. Taylor & Wiley practices zoning and planning law. We do land use throughout the region. John Taylor's in the audience with me as well. I think you've seen his name on a couple of letters that were written to your commission. And I'd just like to start by saying the reason we were even brought into this in the first place is that Ramco, as their lease was coming to an end at this site, sought to bring in a new tenant so that they could continue to utilize this space as it has always been utilized and always intended. It was only upon hearing from the city that they needed to get a use permit that they then contacted us. And the question purely was one of, does this seem consistent with zoning and planning law, and is this consistent with what our grandfathered vested rights are? So that's the purpose for our involvement here, and I will say that our office has quite a bit of experience dealing with these throughout the state. And what I've put together tonight here in a PowerPoint presentation for you is kind of the legal task at looking at a determination of vested rights and trying to figure out from a legal perspective basically what the right that's held by the property owner is and whether or not the new use falls within that. And that's, you see often at the courts, kind of it's a very straightforward process that's walked through. And I'd like to take you through that this evening if I may. So to get to the next slide, scroll. Great. Thank you. So what I'd like to do first is just quickly take a look at the law, followed by the evidence we have here before us, and then hopefully we can all take a look at what we think is a reasonable conclusion. Starting off, what is a vested right? A vested right is actually a constitutional protection, and it's basically when you have a use that was legally occurring at the time a locality changes the law, making your use no longer permitted, the law respects the fact that you've made that investment and you become a vested nonconforming use. You actually have legal protected rights to continue what you were doing at that time. What is the relevant date that should be looked at in order to determine the vested right? I think staff just took you through a nice aerial show of the history of this site from 1993 all the way to 2016. But if you're talking about legalities, what becomes important and critically important is the date upon which the ordinance was passed that made you nonconforming. And as you can see in the case law here, the lawful use existing at the time the zoning ordinance becomes effective is what's key here. And the right that existed at that time is what you vest. So the question that becomes essential for us is, in 2004, when the City of West Sacramento adopted Land Use Policy A10, which I will move forward to, Land Use Policy A10 at that time said existing non-conforming uses were to effectively become frozen, and new non-conforming industrial uses in Pioneer Bluff were not to be established. That was the point at which the city said, we're going to put a stop now to industrial uses, and everything that comes in the future needs to be consistent with waterfront mixed use. So the question then becomes, in 2004, what was going on at this site? What rights vested as of that time for Ramco Enterprises? And then the next question for you to consider is, what rights actually become vested? And as you can see here, that first quote from the state's Supreme Court in Hanson Brothers says, and I'll just read this, a vested nonconforming use must remain similar to the use existing at the time the zoning ordinance became effective, and that intensification and expansion of the existing nonconforming use is not permitted. The next quote from another California case, Endara versus Culver City, a vested nonconforming use is not restricted to the identical particular use which was in existence at the time of the enactment of the zoning ordinance, but embraces any use substantially the same or similar. So now I'd like to move on to the evidence here, and really what our task becomes now is to examine what was occurring on this site in 2004 and decide, is the new use that is being proposed today substantially the same or similar to what was existing then? What that use that in 2004 vested and became Ramco's nonconforming use. So I'll turn the page, and these slides are going to look similar. I think we probably have the same Google Earth application. My first date here is 2001, and I've started and based this right around that critical time frame, December 8th of 2004, you'll remember, is the date the general plan was amended. So that becomes our critically important date. At that time, you can see 2001, Rollins was operating here. I do think it's worth noting that you were shown a comparison of a Penske truck and FDS's fuel trucks, and I believe that was intended to play into the fact that these are very different. It is important to know that Rollins, which was acquired by Penske in 2005, 2006, is a trucking company that does trucking, not like Penske for people that are trying to move houses, similar to the truck you were showing, but it's a hauling company. So major manufacturers, agricultural uses, rented large trucks from them, hauling trucks, which you can see evidenced in this picture while you have the large trucks parked on the site. Flipping ahead to 2003, you can see in this site, if you actually count the vehicles that are on site, being both maintained and stored there, you have 70 fleet trucks, an additional 9 staff vehicles, and I do put plus or minus because there are limitations to what you can see in the satellite image. The next slide is from 2004, and I think this one is actually really interesting because the date on this is December 31st of 2004, 3 weeks after this use became non-conforming. So this is a pretty good indication of what was occurring at that time and what vested right we have. And you'll see here, you can count 50 trucks and approximately 12 staff vehicles. It's also worth noting that on the northern edge, you have a fueling station that had 4 fueling pumps, and you had trucks at that time, as Dan mentioned, coming out of there throughout the day and night. And for those of you that know the agricultural industry, if you have a farmer that's going to be harvesting their field and they need trucks lined up ready to go at 6 a.m., the trucks that are leaving this site are there at 4 a.m. getting fueled up, getting tuned up, and getting ready to go. So it was not a 9 to 5 operation. It was definitely 24 hours a day. My final slide here is going to be 2006. This would have been the year after the use became non-conforming. This is when Penske had basically taken over Rollins, and as has been mentioned, Penske did at that time and still does had their site over on Evergreen, and Penske was starting to consolidate the uses and move over to Evergreen. And in fact, their lease ended the following year, and in 2007 they left and were quickly replaced by Clark. So let's compare what was occurring in 2004 with what's being proposed and what we asked the city to authorize Ramco to do at this site. If you look at it, 2004, 2005, you had a truck fleet leasing company there that was storing vehicles, maintaining vehicles, dispatching vehicles, and fueling vehicles, coming and going, roughly 50 trucks at a time, 4 fueling stations, approximately 35 employees, not counting the truck drivers, and it was occurring on 4.5 acres. What we have requested that the city approve, consistent with our grandfathered use, is to allow, again, a trucking company that stores, maintains, and dispatches its trucks from this site. We are not asking them to be fueled on the site. In fact, the fuel tanks have been removed. Instead of 50 trucks, we will have 20. Instead of 35 employees, we have roughly 4 to 6. And instead of 4.5 acres, we have 3 acres. Next, I just wanted to show you this aerial image, historical image. The areas that are X'd out in red, the lower one is the 1.5 acres of city property that the city is no longer leasing to Ramco, so the site became 1.5 acres smaller. And the northern X shows the fuel terminal that used to fuel the trucks that were coming and going from here that has since been removed, which reduces the impacts and makes it less impactful, less intense. So the question before you tonight, and this is what we're really asking you to find, and actually what we had requested be found by the zoning administrator when we asked to have the business license moved for FDS, are these activities sufficiently similar in nature to allow FDS to move into this site and operate under the vested non-conforming use that exists there? They both are going to store, maintain, and dispatch truck fleets for transporting goods throughout the region. It's the same use. Furthermore, the number of employees goes down, the overall acreage goes down, the number of vehicles goes down, and the fuel tanks are gone. A reduction. So we would ask you to conclude that the proposed operation of the new tenant, Fuel Delivery Services, is sufficiently similar to the use existing at the time the ordinance changed, that they are within the scope of the vested nonconforming use, and that they do not enlarge, expand, or intensify the use in any way, and therefore are permitted as of right. And I just wanted to jump ahead and talk now, shifting gears a little bit, to some case law that I think is pertinent for you all to be aware of. Indara is the case I cited earlier, but I just want to give you a context of what courts have looked at and found to be sufficiently similar to allow the use to change. Indara was a situation where you had a building that they had manufactured Spanish tiles in for years. The property owner lost that tenant and brought in a new tenant that was doing laminate flooring. And the city attempted to prohibit that change in use, claiming that the new user was going to be a change in the overall use and therefore couldn't be permitted there, that the use was going to require a permit or flat out was prohibited. The court reversed that and found that the building had always been used and was intended for manufacturing uses, and that the impacts were absolutely not going to be greater with the new user, and therefore the court overturned the jurisdiction's decision to prohibit that use. The next one is a case actually out of Pennsylvania, but it shows you that that similar line of thinking is not just in California cases. This isn't unique to us. Because vested rights are constitutionally protected, the case law is throughout the nation. You see case after case after case coming down on the same side. Itama is particularly interesting because it's so similar to the situation we're dealing with. The school district owned a site where it stored and fueled its school buses and maintained them. School district sold the site. The new user brings on a trucking fuel delivery service. And the jurisdiction attempted to prohibit the new user, saying that it was a change in use. And the court said absolutely not. Maintaining, storing, dispatching school buses is the same thing as maintaining, storing, and dispatching fuel delivery trucks. I would say that that is even a greater shift than what we're looking at from Rollins Penske Trucking to FDS Trucking. So, other than legal reasons which have been presented, I think there are considerations that should be thought about in deciding why else FDS should come here. Ones that are pertinent to overarching policies of the city and really what we're all trying to achieve. You heard Dan mention that he's supportive of the Pioneer Bluff plan. We all know this area is transitioning and that the long-term play here is mixed use. The question is when? We just learned that the Broadway Bridge is not going to be built until 2035. We know that you're going to hear later tonight the next phase of the Bridge District, but how long until the Bridge District is developed before you come south of the freeway? When does Pioneer Bluff actually go forward, and what should happen at these sites in the interim? So the reasons we think you ought to allow this use to proceed, one would be you're supporting existing local businesses. Ramco's been here since the 50s. FDS is already here. These are local businesses that are helping the city's tax base, why would we get rid of them prematurely? Secondarily, this move reduces traffic in VMT. FDS is currently at Industrial and Harbor. Those trucks leave there every day, drive over to South River Road, fill up at the Buckeye Terminal, and then move out to the region. They're commuting through Southport to get to this site and then taking off. We're suggesting that they relocate right next door. It's a reduction in traffic, it's a reduction in VMT. And then lastly, they're avoiding blight and urban decay. If the Ramco Enterprises is not allowed to re-tenant its site with a tenant that seems to be completely consistent with what it has historically done, that site is going to fall into non-use, perhaps vacancy. That's going to lead to blight. We see it at the north end of Pioneer Bluff already. It's a health and safety hazard, I would say, for the community to have an area that is more or less abandoned and not utilized while we wait for the Pioneer Bluff transition plan to occur. Therefore, we would like to see some sort of solution here that allows property owners to continue to utilize their properties in the way in which they were intended while the city continues to move forward with its planning effort and figure out an appropriate time in the future to bring these uses to an end. We simply don't believe that time is now. Thus, we would request that your commission do the following. One, reverse the determination of the zoning administrator. Two, recognize the continued existence of the vested right at 1781 South River Road for truck fleet storage, maintenance, and dispatch, consistent with what was happening in 2004. Direct staff to meet with the landowner and define a scope of its vested nonconforming use. And the fourth one is from our letter, and we stand by it again. Sit down with us and let's enter into a deal, at which point we will bring those nonconforming uses to termination and begin the process to convert to mixed use. I am happy to answer any questions you may have. Also, we would request that if you are going to get additional staff presentation, that we be given an opportunity to respond to that. And we actually have additional slides that are designed for a rebuttal if need be. And so we would request that we be allowed additional time if there's going to be additional presentation. Thank you.
Duly noted, and thank you for making that presentation. So if Mr. Keesing and Mr. Ramos could be available, I will take public comment at this time, and then I will turn it over to my commissioners, and I anticipate that they may have questions for either staff or the applicant and their representative. So the first up I have is Mr. Kent Ramos, and then on deck will be Scott Maddox.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, my name is Kent Ramos. I'm the president of Ramos Oil, which has had a presence on South River Road for the last 65 years. Our family owns properties across from and adjacent to the Shell terminal near the intersection of 15th Street and South River Road, about 1 block from the proposed truck facility that you're hearing about tonight. The current uses of our properties are a truck repair shop, a truck painting shop, a 24-hour truck and auto fueling station, the Shell station, if some of you are familiar with that, truck parking, offices and warehouses, and a waste oil transfer facility. Approximately 150 Ramos employees report for work daily at these facilities, many of whom live in West Sacramento. We are also very sensitive to the issue being discussed tonight. We are not opposed to the transition of uses, and we fully understand that at some point our facilities will need to be relocated. However, we must be assured that in the interim years, we can continue to derive economic benefit from the traditional and grandfathered permitted uses of the properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramos. Mr. Maddox.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Scott Maddox. I'm in-house counsel for Clark Pacific, and I'm here tonight representing the Clarks as longtime business owners and property owners in the Pioneer Bluff area. And we have a very deep-seated interest in the outcome tonight on this item. As like Ramcon and the other Pioneer Bluff property owners, we have a very strong interest in protecting our ability to operate within our vested grandfathered rights as well. And so we could see the potential, if this goes the way we're hoping it doesn't, that we could be here before you again, potentially on this same issue. But with that, I just wanted to clarify one thing too. In the report that was provided, the last bullet on the first page, it kind of implies that Clark Pacific moved its manufacturing operations as though we have essentially abandoned and left West Sacramento, and that's not true. We happen to have a large upturn in structural work, and our Woodland plant was most geared for that, especially with the conclusion of the Apple project, which was primarily all structural. West Sac has been primarily architectural for us, so we have every intent of continuing our operation in West Sac should our workload go that route, or should we have an overflow of work that we can't produce in Woodland and we need to come back. So we have not left West Sac. We currently have, I'd say, at least 100 employees working there. Our business development, our engineering staff, our admin, our estimating staff, we're still a pretty strong force on that site. So just wanted to clarify, because this does kind of imply we've abandoned and left the site, and we have not. So with that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maddox. Those are all the speakers that I have listed. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment at this time? Seeing none, I will keep the public comment period open, but I will turn it over to my fellow commissioners, and I'll start with Commissioner Liebig for questions for either staff or, well, actually, let me take a moment. I'll hear from commissioners, and then I think we will hear from city staff, because they may be able to answer questions at that time.
Actually, well, maybe we can reverse that.
Okay.
Chair
So-
Austin, I'm available to, first, I'd like to just comment that we don't have an additional report to present. What I'd like to do is I'd like to respond to some of the applicants' previous comments. I was provided with a copy of their PowerPoint presentation just shortly before the meeting, so I was aware of some of the issues that they wanted to address, and I'd like to respond to those now. First of all, I think that my office, the city attorney's office, and staff are in complete agreement with the applicant that the non-conforming use that was established in 2004 became legal, non-conforming, and Ramco had a vested right in that. After that, though, we largely diverge in opinion. The use in 2004, as conceded by the applicant, was for Penske rental. And staff has provided, in your staff report as attachments, copies of business licenses to show the actual nature and use of that. So it was not, in 2004, a 24-hour, 7-day operation. It was a standard Monday through Friday with partial hours on Saturday. So we're talking about a deviation already in hours of operation. The applicant repeatedly wanted to compare the proposed new use with that of Rollins. Again, Rollins was before 2004. 2004 was Penske. The applicant also largely, actually completely ignored the fact that on or around 2007, Clark Pacific replaced the Penske operation. So again, staff is in complete agreement that to the extent you have a use that is similar or less intense, that use may be replaced, as was the case with Clark Pacific. That's why Clark Pacific was allowed in 2007, because at that point, the use went from a truck rental facility to a contractor's yard and office building. Less impact, less intensity, reduction in use. So if you visualize a funnel, you can see that we're gradually moving to less intensified uses in that area, consistent actually with the general plan policy. So if you're moving to a less intensified use, it's illogical and against the city's own code to now revert back to a more intense use as is being proposed. The applicant has provided a chart for you, and I would encourage you and invite you to look at the chart that staff has provided in the memo that is on your dais dated September 6th, 2017. This is a comparison of what the applicant has provided with actual facts. For example, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but under number of employees, based on the business license application, we were dealing with 17 to 18 employees under the prior nonconforming use, and the applicant himself requested or stated that they would have 34 employees under FDS. I'm not sure where the number 4 came from in their presentation. We pulled all of this information from the business license application that was completed. The hours of operation I've already explained. We were going from a traditional use to a 24-hour, 7-day. By definition, that's an intensely more, that's a intensification in use. Perhaps one of the most important aspects to explain, though, is the type of business. And again, Mr. Tilley has already addressed this, but Penske and Clark Pacific would fall under the truck rental repairs, which have a specific zoning code designation and definition in the West Sac Municipal Code, as compared to fuel delivery services, which would fall under what's called a truck yard. If the city believed that these two uses were the same, they wouldn't fall under different zoning categories. They wouldn't be allowed in different areas of the city. Now I'd like to address some of the legal arguments that were raised tonight. Most importantly, I'd like to turn your attention to what the applicant has relied on, which is the intent behind their use. The City of West Sacramento Municipal Code at section 17.51.060 expressly states, and I quote, that for purposes of this section, a use shall be deemed to have ceased when it has been discontinued, either temporarily or permanently, and this is the most important part of this language, whether the intent to abandon the use or not for a continuous time period set forth in this chapter. Now, the applicant states that, or it's their position, that that language is contrary to state law. It's not. They rely on the Hansen case for their support. Their reliance on that case is misplaced. A careful reading of that case, however, states that that court stated for the proposition that you need to look at the ordinance in place, and only if the ordinance is silent about intent to abandon will a court look for evidence of an intent. That case does not state a rule of law that mere cessation of use is not enough to terminate a legal nonconforming use. Again, in the city's case here, the ordinance is not silent on intent. The ordinance is expressly putting the whole world on notice that intent is irrelevant. The only thing that's relevant is whether the use continued or ceased. In this case, we have photo evidence, the aerial pictorials from Google Images that showed that the use had ceased. The other case that was cited by the applicant, which we initially dismissed because it's an unpublished and therefore not citable case, but it's very interesting. It was out of Nevada County, out of Placer County. The court there opined that deference should be paid to the zoning authorities and how they interpret their own codes. And while it's true that in that case, the court cited that you do need to find intent, the reason why they found that is because the county itself said, we read intent into our own code. So court, you should read intent into our code. Again, I'm going to underscore it. The courts defer to the city or the jurisdiction in how they've construed their own ordinances. In the Hansen case, I'm jumping back a little bit, they cited to the McQuillan Treatise. It's basically a book that talks about the state of the law with respect to land use. And that treatise stated that there are some jurisdictions that draft ordinances that are silent on intent. If you have an ordinance that's silent on intent, then in all likelihood, the court is going to look for you to proffer some sort of evidence to demonstrate intent. But if you're amongst the other jurisdictions that have an ordinance that says you don't need to show intent, then you don't need to show intent. And again, that's where we are here. We don't need to show intent. We just need to show that there has been a cessation of use, which you've seen. But that's not the only reason why this Planning Commission should affirm the zoning administrator's decision. There's other reasons. As Mr. Tilley has explained, and I've reiterated, we're talking about two completely different uses. Fuel delivery systems services is not Clark Pacific and is not Penske. They are delivering either large tanker trucks filled with fuel, or they're empty and potentially even more exposed to explosions. They have significant more impacts. They're unwieldy tanker trucks, and they're treated differently in our code. Finally, I would like to say that the northerly portion is separate and apart from the non-conforming part to the south. The northerly portion, which there's a graph or a map that is attached to the staff report, was only recently sold to Ramco. It was initially sold to Clark Pacific on or around September 2016, and then Clark Pacific sold that to Ramco, I believe, in December. So that was a separate purchase and sale. But for those reasons, staff is looking for the Planning Commission to make findings that the use has ceased, that FDS is a completely different type of use, and it's a more intense use. And with that, I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
So in the interest of time, I'm actually going to allow commissioners to have their questions. If you have questions for the applicant, what I would prefer is that we address some of our questions from the dais for either city staff or the applicant, and that the applicant can respond at a single time. Now, if that's something we can achieve, that would be my goal. Otherwise, I'd be open to having a dialogue. My intention here is so that this continues to feel more like a commission hearing rather than a judicial hearing. So I'll start with Commissioner Liebig. Are there questions you would like some responses specifically from the applicant for? Or do you think that he can collect some of our questions and then respond to all of them at the same time?
I'll leave that up to you. I have one question for the applicant.
Okay. I think I'll start with and see if this is consistent with other folks. I think the applicant can collect some of our questions and comments and be able to respond at a single time. So with that, Commissioner.
Okay, for either Danny Ramos or Mr. Kiesling, and I apologize, my question is going to be a little out of order because of this, but if staff's conclusion was that this is a different use, even regardless of the non-conforming part, why didn't Ramco go for a conditional use permit, which would have potentially allowed for your use to continue?
I want to kind of collect some of these questions because I anticipate that there may be more than one. That way it won't be up and down, up and down. I don't want this to be kind of a dialogue such situation. So do you have other questions for city staff?
Oh, no, that was for.
Oh, that was your question?
That was for the applicant, yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with questions for the applicant. Mr. Vu, do you have any other questions for the applicant?
Not right now.
Commissioner Castillo?
I have a question in terms of there's a huge difference in the staff report chart versus the chart that was provided by Mr. Ramos and the team in terms of employees. So if they can address the where the number 4 came from versus the number 34 from the business license, I think I'd like some clarification on that as well. And in terms of the tank cars they're going to be used, in terms of the traffic, will there be an increase in traffic versus what there currently is now as it relates to the tank cars in that area? The other question, number 3, is will the tank cars that are stored in that area be empty, or will they be full if they stay there overnight? Because it's not clear in the staff report or the presentation whether that's the case or not. And I may have some more as I go along, but those are just some that I can that I wrote down.
Great, thank you very much. And Commissioner Lepore.
The questions I have really are more on the, I think, on the business side. What broker efforts were, if any, were conducted. Other potential users, if any, other users came, and just the deals didn't work out, or what the situation was there. And then, if this is truly the highest and best use of the property, or if there's, potentially a better use that would still allow the property owners to receive income. 'Cause as, a business owner, I understand that dilemma, and also development tends to always take longer than we hope, so.
Can you just reiterate?
Sure.
I just want to reiterate that as well with Commissioner Poore. I'm not 100% bought into the idea that this property will be vacant if this business is not allowed in that area. So I think if you can help address some of those questions as it relates to the types of businesses that can actually go in there and other potential uses, I think that'll help everyone understand, kind of what the plan is for Aramco moving forward.
So one follow-up question, would folks be interested in them responding to what type of outreach and marketing efforts to conforming uses that have been done? Maybe a general reference to that. But in any case, so those are some of the questions the commissioners have, and both applicant and his counsel are welcome to come up and respond.
Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity. I do want to start just by stepping back quickly. We have responses to the comments that were put out by the city attorney, but we don't think this is an appropriate place to have a legal debate, and I don't want to bore anybody on the commission with a legal debate, nor the audience. I will just say that we are confident in the law that we put forward, exceedingly confident in it, and stand by the positions that were put out. Furthermore, I do want to just on the record note that we believe that what just occurred was highly objectionable and an unfair procedure. That was clearly a planned response and retort that didn't respond to the presentation I gave, but was a response to the letter that we submitted on August 10th that the city has had for a month at this point, and we have not received a response back to. And rather than receive that in writing ahead of time so that we could prepare appropriately, we received it orally tonight, and we find that to be unacceptable. Just as a matter of procedure, that's not the way in which you operate, and that's not the way in which you treat a company that's been operating in your jurisdiction for 60-plus years. So that being said, let me get on to your questions. Why not come in for a CUP once we figured out that staff wasn't willing to say it was consistent with our vested right?
It was offered, and one of the reasons I'm asking is under Ramco's desired outcome is enter into an agreement with Ramco for its eventual termination consistent with the Pioneer Bluff transition plan. The CUP potentially could have allowed a trucking business, and this could have been an opportunity to sit down and work through that. So I was just curious why we went away from that.
So when we applied for a business license transfer, and that's what was up for it, and this, when they said, no, you have to come back to a CUP, they said, okay, and I started to get the paperwork to actually start it, had some discussions with staff regarding that, but they were very clear to me that they were not going to support that use there. Very clear. They said, basically, we as staff are not going to support their use. That got my question, what are our property rights here? The question popped up, and what's going on? That's why we approached legal counsel to find out, about, what are our grandfather rights here? And believe me, I've been before this commission before, back in 2004, and said, this is unintended consequences. This is a tough deal in these transition areas, especially when you have a very intense fuel terminal next to you. And I might as well answer all the questions here. The uses I could put in there is office, multifamily, and I can put a nursery, indoor plants and something, but it's very, very limited in terms of what I can put next to it. And I don't think I can build an office building or a apartment building next to those tanks right now. So it really comes down to Buckeye, when they get out of there, and what we do together for us uses to stay and exist, continue generating revenue for property taxes, have legitimate businesses that have been here for a long time, stay here. And we're just really worried about this, the transition. I think there's been a bad public policy, and I pointed this out before, on the record here, and it's in the minutes back in 2004, that this was going to happen. So I just hope, we're very open to sitting down and working this out, but we seem to get at the upper level here, they don't want to talk to us. Charlene's been very good about talking to us, and I really appreciate Charlene and David and stuff, but we don't get any communications from staff up above there. It's really disappointing. We've been able to work out these differences since we incorporated here. Every city manager, there's always some conflicts, being able to sit down and work it out. Very disappointed and very upset about it, and I hope we can do something about it. So we can just continue to keep our buildings leased here. I'm really worried about the blight. That yes, it's hard to get tenants into your building when you got to come get a conditional use permit. Now I do, if it's a different use, I understand. We've got to come in, explain why and all that. But if it's a similar use, be able to come in and just go. It's a 6-month process it takes to seek what you're exposed to. It's in the cost. Most tenants don't want to do it. So the buildings are going to sit. Not only ours, others, as tenants leave and they have to reoccupy. You want a blight problem, go look at right now where Cemex was. That's what's going to happen there. I don't mean to be fear-mongering here, but we got to be careful. We've got to be careful. And we respect what we're trying to do here. We've been really working hard to try to have this remake of Southwood Road happen. We've actually committed to planning on our own and worked with staff. We would like to continue that process. We think this has got great potential. But we've got to be able to survive in the interim. So, sorry.
Mr. Amos, since you're on that topic, would you mind speaking a little bit to the question of what other interest or what other marketing or outreach you've done to conforming use tenants?
Just a marketing question real quick.
Sure,
Okay.
go for
Just
it.
real quick, we've had another rental company called Neff Rentals that came, they do mostly equipment rentals and stuff, very similar again too. They made an inquiry to planning staff and told that use would not be allowed, so they kind of went away on us. I had Rafe from Bike Dog come up and take a look at it. And I think that use would have been allowed, but at the time, they didn't need the whole building, didn't need the whole yard, like what we had there in the building. And they were opening up their Broadway location and said, we need to get that up and running and see. So the timing-wise, they weren't ready. They couldn't take the whole building. Understand that, great company, love to have them, but they just weren't ready. And so that's what we had a bird in the hand, with FDS. And remember, they're coming from Industrial and Harbor all the way to that site. Those trips are coming there already. I just want to make that very clear. So it's not intensively. In 24/7, it was Rollins that was there, and that's when they merged. So I know it's a little fuzzy. It was back, 15 years ago, but believe me, they were operating 24 hours.
So Commissioners Castillo and Laporte, did that sufficiently answer your question, or do you have additional follow-up
I haven't
questions?
answered my question.
And I'd like to get to that question as well. So to close it out, though, with Commissioner Liebig, to your question as to why not come in and get the CUP, one, we had already gotten indication from staff that they wouldn't support the CUP even if we did come in. Secondarily, based upon grandfathered non-conforming rights, you have a vested property interest. You don't need to come in and seek a discretionary entitlement if you already have the right to do it, a constitutionally protected right. And that was the advice that we gave to the Ramos family. The second question I heard was, there seems to be a huge difference between the chart that was provided to you all from staff compared to the chart we put out and questions about that. I will tell you that I came down here and actually pulled all those business licenses as well, and I've gone through them, and I can go through discrepancies. Again, I would on the record like to say that if there was a chart that was different than ours, it should have been provided to us ahead of time as well. But that being said, we said 4 employees, not including drivers. 34 is the total of their employees that are on the site permanently, plus their drivers of their trucks. And when you look at Penske's old applications where they say they have 18 employees, that's not including their drivers of their 50 trucks. So if you added those drivers in, Penske has 68 employees and FDS has 34. So I think that still would be a reduction. will there be a traffic increase as a result of this? There may be an increase in the number of FDS trucks at the site, but not an increase in the trips or the number of truck trips total. FDS has trucks running trips constantly, so they're circulating through, not just coming one time. So the number of trips per day is really dictated by the amount of capacity at the Buckeye Terminal, not by the number of trucks located either next door or at Harbor and Industrial. So I think our response would be same amount of truck trips, reduced distance driving, reduced traffic impacts to the whole of West Sacramento. And then when they're stored on site, are they empty or full?
I can answer this question because I used to drive tankers, so my cousin Ken here, he can answer it too. They're empty. When you load up a product, you go deliver it. You got drivers, you got overhead, you deliver it. So you bring a truck back, typically that's where they break down and they'll refuel the truck itself, clean it up, get it ready for the next shift, and they'll go load and go. That's typically, they're not, maybe at one point in time or something might be a loaded truck come, but it's typically, that's how you dispatch and you work your trucks, is change shifts to the empty trucks, so you don't.
Just to follow up on that, is there the residue still there overnight in a particular tank car?
Well,
In terms of, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I'm in the railroad business, and there are strict regulations as it relates to tank cars.
And the same with the
And there are
PUC
still concerns
with trucks, yeah.
with being just as explosive as they would be if they were full or empty. So I'm just curious in terms of what that would look like. in a
And
particular-
exactly, as you know, the local land use law doesn't govern, it's the PUC, it's a truck that's movable, so that doesn't even come into play, so that's, you know this very well, so, thank you.
And you reminded me a good point also, your question with traffic, and then also are they full or not? I just want to say there is a tie there that relates back to the 24/7. One, we would argue that Rollins always was 24/7, just like FDS is going to be. But the benefit of FDS being 24 hours, 7 days a week, is that tanker trucks don't want to conflict with commuter traffic. So they purposely fill up at nights and make their deliveries at nights when the gas station is not being used, when people are not in the way, and therefore it's a reducing the conflict between them and commuter traffic. So if you're talking about, 24/7, it's going to result in worse traffic impacts, it actually is a reduction because most of those truck trips are coming in off-peak hours. You're not having the conflicting movements. Broker efforts Dan hit on, but I do want to touch, your next question was, is there a better use of this site that would have been possible that we could have done? I think Dan touched on that. The future of this site next to the river, mixed-use residential, it's going to be fantastic. Great views. It's not there yet. And as Dan said, Bike Dog, great user too. I go to their facility here on a regular basis, but they only can take half the building. They have no use for the yard. This is 3+ acres. It's designed for somebody that needs to be able to park trucks on it and utilize trucks. And the return on the investment doesn't make sense. It's like if you lost your restaurant tenant and the next guy came back and said, I'd like to build a restaurant here too, but I only want to use 1/3 of your building. You're not going to take them. You're going to wait for the restaurant that wants your entire restaurant. Similarly, if you had a house you wanted to rent out, you wouldn't give it to the person that just wanted to rent a room. You want to rent the house. And that's the situation we have here. We have a property that is intended and has always been used for a particular type of use. We would like to continue that type of use. Thanks. And if it would be helpful, I would just like to end by referring back to the slide of what Ramco would request that the commission do, which was our 4 points there and what we would ask that the action you all take tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll turn it back to our commissioners. I just want to ensure that they manage to ask any additional questions of city staff that they may have had, and I'll again start with Commissioner Liebig. I'll also offer this as an opportunity to begin discussion if you don't have questions for city staff.
Thank you. Thank you for the applicant. It was actually very educational. This is probably one of the lengthier presentations we've heard for an administrative action.
Chair Austin, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but just for a procedural approach, if you could close the public comment
Oh, yeah.
before we move forward.
Absolutely.
Thank
So
you.
I'll close the public comment. Commissioner Liebig, back to you.
Sure. I actually don't disagree with Mr. Ramos's comments, and I certainly don't disagree with your desire to keep businesses up there, especially as things are transitioning. There is a sensitivity with time, and we've been delicately working with that now for several years, and I think some references were made for other businesses and other conditional use permits, essentially, that were worked out. Given that we're looking at the zoning administrative actions, not necessarily approving your business, but looking at the zoning administrative actions, I'm considering three basic questions. One, is this a new or different use, and is it more intense? So I'm looking at the intensification. And then, sorry, that was the second. And then third, regardless of time lapse or cease of operation. It's currently proposed as a truck yard, which is defined as a different use from rental and is zoned differently. That's this kind of the sticky point for me. It is a higher industrial zone than rental, which is can occupy commercial. Regardless of the activity, I know there was a lot of emphasis on activity. For me, the use is different, and it's not in line with the legal non-conforming use. We would need to be able to find that it is the same use, that there's not an intensification, so it can be the same or a less intense use, and that it's continued, a continued use. Sorry if I have notes all over the place, so. A truck rental would be a legal non-conforming continued use. And so we're not voting whether or not you can or cannot have business. It's just whether or not the truck yard is the same as a rental. So, those are all my comments this time.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Vu.
I would like to hear from Public Safety and their thoughts on, I know the issue has been raised before about safety of the trucks parked there or ingress and egress of the trucks onto the streets.
And if you could introduce yourself when you approach, thank you.
Hello, I'm Sergeant Mark Marquez, Westside Police Department, in charge of traffic and commercial enforcement. So, to answer your question, even though the trucks already fill up, as was stated before by the presenters, the issue that we have with public safety is it's the egress and the ingress route. Right now, even though if they come out of Ramos or from 15th Street, there is a straight, more or less straight access to Buckeye, Ramco, Shell. The problem we have at this area is that it's on an inside curve. The actual fence line is very close to the street, and so the sight lines are not there like you see down a block away. So when you do time distance and the vehicle's going 35 miles an hour, once the truck, these slow-moving trucks come out, there's less likely for a vehicle to come to a complete stop for something might happen. This is based on all my training experience. I've been qualified as a reconstructionist for traffic collision. I used to drive truck for 8 years. I still have my Class A. I still drive truck today for the city. We move heavy equipment around. So I have a pretty unique knowledge set about trucks and also with traffic just due to my training experience. So that's one thing that we're worried about. We already have that issue just right on Jefferson and 15th with the AMPM that's right there, ARCO. Same thing, people turn across on the inside curve. Myself, I've almost been hit several times. Just luckily I'm able to stop my motorcycle fast enough I don't broadside a car. And it's all has to do with sight lines and vehicle traffic speeds. So that's one issue we have with the roadway and where the location is. In regards to the trucks being in the yard, loaded or unloaded, they're in a locked facility. Historically, an empty fuel truck is more expensive than a full one because of the air-fuel mixture. It's more balanced. And so historically, you don't have issues with that, just the way they're designed, but we're fine with them being in the yard. It's just access coming in and out. These are, when they're loaded or unloaded, they don't accelerate like a vehicle. They're pretty good size. You know, you got a double set with a tractor pulling it. So they don't go through the gears like a normal car does. So if they're going to Buckeye, it's a very quick shot, popping out and then crossing traffic again. The truck's not going to get to speed. They're going to be very slow as they're rolling down the street. So we're just worried about the sight distance along with that fence line and the curve of the road with vehicle traffic. This is going to be one of the major ingress and egress to Southport in the near future. It's already started to. So we're going to see increased traffic more and more and more through this area.
Thank you. So do you have additional questions for public safety?
Just a question. Did you, when analyzing the traffic or the safety risk as it relates to the current site of the tanks cars versus where they would commute at this new location, would it not reduce the safety risk even though because they're traveling a shorter distance though? I mean, because there's a lot of and the other thing is there's not much on-street traffic at night if they were going to refuel and leave at night. And so did you take the time of day into consideration too when analyzing the traffic impacts?
When you talk about field delivery, they don't just move at night. I'm out in that area. I work the Wrigley Field games all the time, 72 home games. There's a traffic officer out there every home game. We see trucks come every 15, 20 minutes. At night, during the day, you'll see them stopping across the intersection of Jefferson and 15. They may have more deliveries at night, but they don't stop in the afternoon or in the morning. It continuously comes. You can go out there today and see that there is constant traffic of the trucks. The distance of them traveling, it's no different than them coming from Evergreen to that site. The problem we have is that it's an inside curve. The truck's going to come from the inside of the curve. So as the car's coming around, the issue is going to be northbound traffic. As the car comes on the curve, the truck is pulling out and the sight line is around the corner. So you can't see around the corner. The problem we have is that the truck will travel a short distance, will not build up to speed, therefore it has to cross the street to go to Buckeye, turn across traffic, or continue to wherever it's going to go. So that's the problem we have just in that site facility. The truck traffic may stay the same, it's just the actual amount of time it takes for it to build speed on the inside curve.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Marquez? Thank you very much. Commissioner Vu, if you have additional questions? Any discussion? Okay, moving on to Commissioner Castillo.
I guess I asked some of my questions. In terms of the one question that I had for City Attorney, in terms of the agreement and that they would propose as one of the 4 points, I guess, number 4, would such agreement, let's say we were to move forward with that, would such agreement be legally binding, or is that a voluntary agreement that Ramco would just sign with whoever that leasee is for that particular site? Is it legally binding, or is it just voluntary? And the reason I ask is because if they do move forward with an agreement and it's not legally binding and it's just voluntary, there could be a chance they say, well, screw it, we're just going to stay here. So I'm just curious in terms of what the city attorney's thoughts are on that particular point.
It would depend on the Planning Commission's initial determination as to whether the commission as a whole believes that the use has ceased and whether the new proposed use is more intense and different. If it finds that the use has ceased, that the use is different, then the new proposed use is different and more intense, then it can't get to the agreement stage because there should be no continuation of a non-conforming use. However, if the commission finds that FDS is similar or less restrictive use and would like to direct staff to allow continuation of it, then any type of agreement with the applicant would be voluntarily agreed upon agreement, but once executed, would be legally binding.
Thanks.
With, of course, approval by the city council. That's something that the council would approve.
Any other questions? No? Okay, Commissioner Lepore.
I have one quick question for the applicant. I'm sure it's in this report, but I can't seem to find it. What is the square footage of the building that's on the site?
And I'll open the public comment period for him to respond.
All right.
It's fine, yes.
It's 11,000 square feet, including the office out front.
Okay.
That's it. And just one quick on the officer's testimony about the sightlines. That is correct, but the problem with the sightlines, that's the city's fence that has the slats in it that's causing the visibility problem. So maybe we can get the city to move the fence back or take the slats out, and we have great visibility. Thank you.
The only reason I ask about the square footage is when you mentioned Bike Dog as a possible tenant. And again, putting my business hat on, it seems like there could be a use of a food truck facility there, because I know that the local operators are looking for locations that have their truck yards and needing a large building for a shared kitchen and then yard space for all their trucks. So, thanks.
Thanks so much. So just want to thank the applicant and the city staff for an incredible amount of work that's gone into this. And also, as per usual, my fellow commissioners have brought up a lot of important insights and questions. So thank you all for that. So I just want to identify a couple of things. One is, and I think the city staff and the applicant are aware of this creates quite a dilemma for me. This, as we've identified, is kind of an administrative thing, and I can't tell you how many dozens of hours of work have gone into this particular staff item on just a part of the commissioner's review and background research. And so one thing that I want, these are mostly rhetorical, I'm not expecting folks to respond. On one hand, we have responsible business owner that's been operating for several decades in our community and is a really valued member of our community. And what I want to balance that with is if we are to go through this extended application process and, possible activity afterwards, is this really going to be worth leasing this property for maybe a year with possible extensions? So I want to just let folks know that I think that we need to look at the bigger picture of balancing kind of the cost benefit of what we're trying to accomplish here tonight. But that being said, I think I'd like to turn it over to my commissioners for discussion, but I do want to make a question and request, make a request for a roll call vote on this. I also would like to confirm, and someone can respond, that 3 votes will be sufficient to carry staff recommendation, support or rejection. Would that be 3 votes tonight?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. And just to remind my fellow commissioners that if there's a motion and a second, we can make friendly amendments, but then we would need to vote on the motion on the table. And if that does not pass, then we could go with an alternative approach. And so with that, I will turn it over to discussion and an eventual motion. Floor is open. I'm not going to go in order. Yeah.
There's just one thing, and it's really unrelated to this, but it's just a little weighing on me. I want to make sure we're careful when we say that we could open up to food trucks. Actually, I'm not really sure that we could do that. Because if I were to interpret it, that could actually be a very similar use to what's being proposed right now. And
I don't mean
I also don't have that zoning in front of me.
Yeah.
So that makes me very nervous just to leave that hanging out there. So I want to say, as an idea, maybe, but that would require.
Commissioner Liebig, just for clarification, a catering service would be a permitted use in the waterfront zone.
Fabulous, thank you so much. Now I
Thank you
feel
for
much
jumping
better.
on that promptly.
And just for clarification, I wasn't saying a public use, not like the barn, what a food truck commissary kitchen is for food truck operators to be able to legally make their food versus how they're doing it now, which is illegally either in their homes or other facilities that aren't necessarily county permitted. So
Storage
there's
yards.
a huge need in the region for a commercial kitchen for food truck operators that also have the ability to park safely on site that's, secured.
Great, thank you. That sounds like a great mayor's proposal.
That does, actually.
Just putting that out there. So additional discussion.
Well, I mean, I think, like you had mentioned as well, there's definitely a conflict that we, at least that I have, because I agree with, with the Ramos's stance and not wanting to have an empty property and not, being able to get rent during that period of time, because again, we don't know, hopefully it's sooner than later, but as we know, development tends to always take longer than we hope and plan. So that's obviously one issue, and I do, on the flip side, live right down the street from there, so I, of course, am aware of the current truck traffic that's there now, and, would agree with city staff and zoning that it shouldn't increase as well. So that's, again, kind of where my conflict is.
And just to clarify for the record, we're going to close the public comment period.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess a couple of comments from me based on the presentation. I mean, thanks for both the Ramco and city staff for putting some very descriptive and information, and it was educational for me in terms of the kind of business that you guys currently run, and also a little bit more on the zoning. I'm kind of struggling with this myself. Again, just to reiterate, I work for a company that owns quite a bit of property in the state of California and throughout 23 states, Union Pacific Railroad, and we deal with these kinds of issues all the time. But aside from that, that's just a side comment. I don't think that there's a huge intensity issue, and that there's an expansion issue, and that Ramco and through RDS feel like they're gonna enlarge their business at that property. I am struggling with the question of whether or not it's the same type of business, though. And so that's kind of my sticking point, as well as Commissioner Liebig says. But, in terms of employees, I think that cleared it up for me, and that was one of the things on the chart, one of the points on the chart that would increase intensity. But, you cleared up the fact that, through Penske, there's 17 to 18, but with drivers, that's 68 versus 34 with drivers over at with FDS, and so that that's not a huge concern. I think safety, for me, the way I look at it is it actually would reduce or significantly reduce the safety concerns given the distance that the trucks will be traveling. I think getting them off the streets is important, and reducing that traffic, particularly throughout the day. When cars are going through Jefferson, crossing through 15th is important to me, and so that would definitely take care of that by having a closer location where they would actually refuel and just get on the freeway and get out of there. And so that addresses kind of the safety concerns as well. And I did ask about the residue tank cars, and the tank cars nowadays are made pretty safe. I know the railroads have tank cars, even though we don't own them, are pretty safe in terms of when we transport hazardous materials. So I have confidence in the types of tank cars that are being used that would be used by FDS. But that's kind of, just want to throw that out there, the comments that I have right now. But I want to hear more from the commission and see what.
Yeah. Well, I'll add, there are many things that you've said that I concur with. So I take a step back. So if we had a perfect situation, this is several months ago, what would I have liked to see? I would have liked to see an opportunity for a conditional use permit with a limited term, with conditions that address some of the concerns that have been brought up today. Unfortunately, that is not what we're addressing today. Just to be clear, that we have different circumstances that we're operating under. But that being said, I agree again with what Commissioner Castillo said, and two big things that I consider are not just the policy discussion and the legal discussion we're having today, but really what the impacts are from a land use perspective and from the perspective of desirability and comfort for the residents of West Sacramento, residents and businesses of West Sacramento. I do think that ultimately this is that the applicant's proposal is a more favorable proposal when it comes to safety for issues, related to, I think you've done a good job of describing them. I also think that there's some significant economic considerations, again, related to desirability. I think that on one hand, you will be able to utilize this site. I don't think that this is going to prevent you from being able to find a tenant, but I also recognize that this is a community in transition. So regardless of what the outcome is today, or for what I imagine several weeks or months from now as the decision continues to move forward, or decisions continue to move forward, I think that we are going to be dealing with this. As we identified, we have multiple properties, we have multiple property owners, and this is a community in transition. So I would like to see us to be able to move forward in a way where the city and local business can cooperate, and that hearings like this will not continue. We should not have this type of hearing at this extent of effort and the amount of time that has gone into this for every single property. So I do want to be very cognizant of the kind of precedent that we're setting, and hopefully that our working relationships can continue to be positive. So we just have discussion on the table, no motions yet, but I think we have a lot to work through.
Well, the reason that we're still talking, I find that we're perhaps collectively struggling with this one, and not to say that, every application that comes before us is taken seriously, and this one is requiring a lot of time and a lot of thought. I think the reason that we're struggling with this one is that the uses, the Penske truck versus the FDS, are similar in description. And yet we're looking at it as a use. And again, I think, well, certainly based on the assessment, the uses are not equal. They may be similar in description, but per our zoning ordinance, not similar and less intense, and that's where I'm falling. I do think, and another reason that we're probably struggling, the proposed use is compatible with what's there right now. And what's there right now are all these properties that were zoned pre-2004. And I'll just echo the chair's comments then, that, hopefully we can work together with the property owners to move forward for a transition plan, so we don't end up in situations like this. And I would be in favor of a food truck place.
Just for the record.
As long as it's permitted, we're just.
Any comments?
No others, I'll make the motion. I move that we ratify the zoning administrative action.
So I have a motion,
Second.
and I have a second.
Roll call.
Any final decision or any final discussion items? Seeing none, I will request a roll call vote.
Commissioner Liebig, what is your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Lepore, what is your vote?
No.
Commissioner Castillo, what is your vote?
No?
Commissioner Vu, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Chairperson Austin, what is your vote?
No.
Okay, we have 2 yeses and 3 nos.
Could you repeat that vote, because there's only 5 of us up here?
Correct.
Yes.
Is that correct?
2 yes votes and 3 no votes.
Thank you.
We need findings to go with that.
Chair Austin, because the commission has voted a 3 no, I'd request that you provide direction to staff, in addition to findings to clarify the basis for that to help us move forward.
Duly noted. I think you need to give the commission a moment. So I have notes about the type of use, the intensification of use, and this has not come up, but this has come up in some of my previous discussions, the definition of what the property is, whether it's by parcel or by property. So there's 3 areas that I personally have notes on. If anyone else has any comments that they'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, my comments earlier in terms of intensification, I don't agree with that. It would intensify based on some of the findings, less employees, number of trucks that would be there would be the same as they currently have now. The safety risk, it reduces, I believe, the safety risk based on the amount of, the length of location where they need to, they need to transport. And then I guess one of the things that I would like to see if we do, if the council would consider is an agreement with Ramco for its eventual termination, consistent with the Pioneer Bluff Transition Plan. I think obviously there's a clear path, or there's a clear policy from the city as it relates to developing that area, and I think Ramco is working in good faith with the city to support that effort, and having some kind of agreement. I would be uncomfortable not having an agreement, but having some kind of agreement, I think, would be consistent with what they've been saying and what the city would want to see there eventually. So, I'm looking at my various notes here as well.
Well, and then I concur with you that my perception is that I don't see an intensification of use. I concur about the concerns or the lack thereof around safety and security. And although you brought up a desire to have an agreement, if this were to move forward to another state, which I imagine would include a conditional use permit and a business license, that the conditional use permit would carry conditions that addressed any commission concerns, which would be brought up at the time, that may include safety, security, which would include like visibility, hours of operation, and those types of concerns.
I think I might be able to help guide this discussion a little bit. I think what we're looking specifically for, and you've addressed some of it through the comments, but what I'm hearing is that the Planning Commission finds that the proposed FDS use would not result in an intensified use. I'd like a finding on whether you believe that there has been a cessation of use for at least 12 months, and I'd like a finding as to the fact that FDS is either a similar or reduced use.
So regarding the cessation of use, I think it depends on the date that we're looking at. I know that there is a discrepancy between what city staff and the applicant have identified as when we kind of start that 12-month clock. There may be, and I need to look through my documents, but there may be a finding that based on when business licenses were inquired or applications were submitted, but I need to look through to confirm that. And then what was the first part was the intensification, second part was the 12-month period, and what was the third? FDS's.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Yes, it sounds like there's a need for Planning Commission findings on 3 items. One about the intensification, which I think that you've articulated. The second was on the cessation for the lack of cessation over a 12-month period. And then third, I believe, was FDS's.
The similarity or reduction in use as compared to Clark Pacific and Penske. And the reason why that's important is because if the Planning Commission is finding that there's been no intensification of use, there's been no cessation of use, and the FDS operation is similar or reduced operation as compared to the previous non-conforming, then they'd be able to continue operations. So if you make those findings, that would be allowed, and that's what I'd like to request to be made into the record.
I think the presentation was clear that the site will be used for servicing, parking, and fueling all vehicles, similar to what was used before for this particular use, which was servicing, parking, and fueling all fleet vehicles for Penske and Rollins Leasing Corp. Is that sufficient?
Chair Austin, may I
Yes.
ask for a 5-minute break to
Yeah.
draft some notes and come back to the
Yes, and
planning
I'm going to need a
commission?
5-minute break, too. So if we take this 5-minute break, would that mean that we need to adjourn, go back?
No, just, I'm requesting just a 5-minute recess.
Yes.
Thank you.
Granted.
Too bad we don't have light switches like the movie theaters.
Test. There we go, thanks. Oh, we'll be reconvening in 30 seconds.
30 seconds.
I'm just going to give folks a
Snap,
chance
snap.
to come in.
I'm not questioning, I'm making fun of you, that's fair. Just this one.
All right, so we're reconvening from our recess. Do you have comments, or are you prepared for us to provide findings?
I do have proposed language for you that you may then use as a basis for your motion.
Okay, thank you.
So the Planning Commission finds that the proposed FDS use does not intensify the previous non-conforming use at the South River Road site. There has not been a cessation of use for more than 12 months, and the FDS business is similar to the prior established use.
I'm going to try. Okay. So,
For ease of reference, one of the commissioners can just move the language that I have just made into the record, and you can take a roll call vote on that.
okay. Well, thank you for that. Would you like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to move the recommended language that was recommended by our city attorney.
And then, second. I have a motion and a second. Ready for a roll call vote? And so just to clarify, are we voting yay on accepting this language, or are we saying the vote would be nay for the reasons of the language?
A yes vote would be that you are in support of the FDS replacement use. A no would mean that you are in favor of the initial zoning administrator interpretation.
Thank you for that clarification.
Commissioner Lepore, what is your vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Castillo, what is your vote?
Yes?
Commissioner Vu, what is your vote?
No.
Commissioner Liebig, what is your vote?
No.
Chairperson Austin, what is your vote?
Aye.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal with the city clerk within 15 days of tonight's action, and the appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
Thank you, audience and commission and staff and applicants, for being patient through that process. With that, we'll be moving on to item 5, public hearing regarding a planned development permit for a mixed-use building at 1558 through 1600 Jefferson Boulevard. Mr. Laffey.
Think I had any comments?
So do you have a PowerPoint? Okay. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. This item up for your consideration tonight is a plan development permit and site plan approval for a mixed-use building at 1558 Jefferson Boulevard. This is a map showing the location of plan development 40, and then also the location of the proposed development project. Plan development 40 is the PD along Jefferson Boulevard, encompassing all those lots that are not very deep but somewhat wide. This property, zoomed in here, is between 17th Street and Vermont Avenue, south of the Animal Hospital, and it's about 200 feet wide and 50 feet deep. And here's a street view image of the property. As you can see, it's not very deep. So one of the challenges of these properties along Jefferson Boulevard is how to accommodate development with a lot that is not very deep. It's fairly constrained. So Plan Development 40 has additional development standards to allow for ways to mitigate this and have development which would be closer to the property lines than what the normal zoning code would allow for. Plan Development 40 is a fairly old plan development, but it's still on the books for that stretch of property, that stretch along Jefferson Boulevard there. So this is the site plan. Before you tonight is site plan approval. Plan Development 40 has a provision requiring site plan approval by the Planning Commission. So this is the proposed site plan. They went through a few revisions to figure out a way to get everything accommodated on the site. They flipped it. We got the trash enclosure fitted in there, and also all the parking. So trying to get it all accommodated on the site was a little bit of a challenge, but this is what the end result is. So they have 12 parking spaces provided, and they are required to have 11. And I'll go into the breakdown of the parking in the next few slides. This is a 2-story mixed-use building. Here's an elevation, a view from the street. The bottom floor, there's going to be a retail on the northern edge, and then some little office suites. And then on the second floor, some residential. And this is in the commercial zone, and the commercial zone allows for residential on the top floor if it's above the ground floor as permitted by right use. And then the commercial, the retail on the bottom is permitted by right as well. So here's a floor plan. As you can see, the bottom, the first floor is office spaces, and on the northern side, which is the right side on the PowerPoint, is the applicant is proposing a coffee shop or something in that nature. And then the second floor, some residential units. So here's a breakdown of the parking. We went through this and determined that 12 spaces were provided and 11 were needed. They do have some on-street. And then also, they have parking backing up right up against the rear property line.
That was really the only way to accommodate the required parking for that size of a development. But the required landscaping that would have, the plan development 40 requires 5 feet of landscaping between the parking and the rear property line. So we're proposing to have that landscaping, the applicant's proposing to have that landscaping on the other side, in the rear, and then also landscaping along the front. So the applicant is here tonight to answer any questions, and they have a presentation as well. So that concludes my presentation. And then I'll
Thank you. I think we'll turn it over to the applicant, and then we can turn it over to commissioners for questions for either city staff or the applicant.
Good evening, Chair Austin and Planning Commission. My name is Greg Detweiler. I'm here with my daughter, Emma. I'm a custom home builder. I've been a custom home builder for 30 years, and Emma is a realtor. I'm a resident of West Sacramento. I moved here in 2013 and lived both in the State Streets and Ironworks. So as described, the proposed project is a 2-story mixed use, combining office space, apartments, and a coffee shop or a deli. When I first moved here as a small business owner, my greatest challenge was to find a small office space. My business was too big to work out of home and too small for any of the office space that I could find anywhere here in the city. So I eventually found space in Thomas, where my office is currently located, and I do that commute every day. Based on that need, we found this lot and thought it would be very appropriate for a mixed use of small office space, some affordable housing, and also if you live in the State Street neighborhood, there's nowhere to walk to for a coffee or a deli or anything like that. There's bars, there's breweries, there's restaurants, but there's nowhere else for people to hang out unless they cross Jefferson Avenue, which is an extremely busy road, and then go into other parts of West Sacramento. And then, you know, as I've joined the community here, I found that one of the greatest needs of talking to other small business people is trying to find a place where that they can hire somebody, that person doesn't have to come to their home to work out of a small office space. And I think that's very important too with the city, with keeping people employed within the city and creating employment opportunities with the city. So this project was designed with all of those things in mind. In addition, there's always a constant need for affordable housing. So the upper level of this project will have 3 units, one of which is a studio unit. Studio units are virtually impossible to find anywhere in the city of West Sacramento or Sacramento. And then the third component of this project is either a coffee or a coffee shop or a deli. And we've consulted with our neighbor, the animal hospital. They've made it very clear they would love to have somewhere for their people to wait. Their waiting room there is extremely tiny, and people often have to basically wait out in the parking lot while they're waiting for their animal. So it'd be nice to have somewhere they could walk to next door to be able to wait. Personally, I'd love to have a coffee shop that I could walk to or ride a bike to that I didn't have to cross a busy street as well. The site itself has been very, very challenging due to how narrow it is. We have reworked the design several times. I do build throughout the state. I would like to say on a personal level, it's been very good working with the city as far as feedback, and I appreciate that. Seamus has provided a lot of very positive feedback that's enabled us to be able to go away and rework the design to make it work. And that's been very important to me, so I just want to say thank you for that. The end result is a modern building. I think will be a very positive addition to the Jefferson corridor. And I think it also starts to tie in all of the new development and all of the new growth in the Bridge District into some of the older areas of the city as well. So in conclusion, I feel the project provides much-needed affordable office space, much-needed affordable apartment space, keeping residents in the city as prices go up and it becomes more and more expensive to live and rent here, and will help provide employment opportunities also within the city. So I'm asking for your approval. I'm looking forward to working with the city on this project.
Thank you very much. With that, I guess I will open the public, I'll open the public hearing. And I have no requests to speak at this time, so if you are interested in speaking, you may approach now. Yeah, come on over. And just as a reminder, introduce yourself and then complete a comment card. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Hello, my name is Emma Detweiler. I've been working with my father, Greg, on the project, and I also wanted to thank Seamus and also, I believe, Victoria. They were great to work with, and I really appreciated their patience throughout the process. I guess all I wanted to say is being a young person, walking, biking, things like that are very important. I've also lived in West Sacramento, and I plan to live in West Sacramento in the future. And I think a project like this on this particular portion of Jefferson Boulevard is very exciting and positive for the community of the State Streets. And I think it will tie in nicely with what's happening in the Bridge District currently, and also on the waterfront, on the other side of Jefferson from us in the future down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other requests to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Well, actually, I'll keep it open in case there are questions for the applicant. And I'll actually start with Commissioner Lepore.
I know we're not necessarily design review, but in the packet, there wasn't the renderings, but in the presentation, there was. And if maybe the applicant or.
Pull back up again?
Yeah, the applicant or this city staff could explain kind of the materials and finishes and.
And if the clerk could pull up that page from the PowerPoint so we can look at it as we discuss it, that would be great. Thank you.
So what's before you tonight is for site plan approval. So just the site plan. We do have the validation if Cindy wants to.
Right, yeah, like I said, I know this is not a design review discussion. I just for benefit of overall project and just, I mean, I love the concept of it's almost like a live-work design, so I think that's definitely something that's needed. And I was just curious in terms of the finishes and just the look and feel of it. Thanks.
What we tried to create here is a multi-dimensional look. It won't be just a flat front of the building. Each section will step in and out. We'll have multiple different materials. The dark colors will be stucco. There will be other parts which will be like a Hardy's product. Expansive glass. The roof material will be metal. And as you can see, the roof changes direction. In some cases, it faces forward, and then some faces back. So many different uses of architectural materials. And then also, of course, what's not shown on there will be the landscaping, which will come later down the line.
Thank you.
Before you run away.
Yes.
How tall is it? That's the one thing I was looking. The height.
I can't read that.
I can't read it either, and it is literally right here. The reason I'm asking is that it's one of the stipulations in the PD40 development guidelines is the height, and I'm sure you're under it based on the appearance, but I'm sorry, David, I didn't mean to throw you off, but I was just curious if you don't know.
I'm sorry, I don't actually have that page in front of me, but
It's not
I know
critical.
my architect would have made sure it was underneath.
Yeah, the PD40 height limit describes as 35 feet.
Yes.
I would certainly think that this building at 2 stories would be, well under 35. I can't quite read the,
Yeah, I didn't-
on
I
the
didn't
screen
see it, so-
either.
Okay, it's not critical. I was curious for reference for a later comment on PD40.
It's not on the first floor, 12 on the second.
Okay. So 21.
Oh, it's 21, not 35? Oh, no, it's 21.
The height
Okay,
of
got
the
it.
building.
That's what I said. Like I said, 35 would be 3 stories. Commissioner Lepore, any additional questions?
No other questions, just thank you for the project. I'm excited to get some more density of housing and as you mentioned, more office space that's affordable for small businesses. So,
Do you have any
thank you.
questions or comment for city staff?
Nope.
Okay, all right, Commissioner Castillo.
Can you go over the parking plan? I may have missed it in the plans, but.
Yeah, we're providing 12 spaces. And the requirement, according to the city's requirement, is 11, so providing one extra space.
It's on attachment 3.
We're also providing bicycle parking as well. That'll be a major part of the design, will be an enclosed undercover bicycle parking section.
If I can just cut in real quick, since it's a related question to the parking, how is the street parking being handled? Are those spots exclusive to the renters of of this property, or, would the city need like special permits for that? Or maybe that's more appropriate for city staff.
Yeah, no, any spaces on street could not be restricted to a particular user. It's not an area where we have a permit parking program yet, but it certainly could be possible. It's just PD 40 area fills in, that may become necessary, but at this time, there's no preferential parking permits available in this area.
So of those 12, then, I saw in one of the graphics that there were 3 or 4 parking spots in front of the property. Is
50
that
feet.
part of the 12?
Yes, so we would anticipate that's part of the commercial and how a lot of customer parking could be accommodated, much like where the vet is right now.
And it's 50 feet from Jefferson Boulevard too, so it's away from the street.
Commissioner Castillo, do you have additional questions for
thanks.
applicant or staff? Okay, great. Commissioner Vu, additional questions?
A couple of comments and one question. This is a cool little project.
Thank you.
I've been in West Sac for almost 11 years now, and, just driving up and down Jefferson all the time, and over on that right-hand side going south, you see all these really awkward-looking empty lots. And I always wondered, what is the city ever going to do with these?
Right.
So thank you for bringing this forth. I think it's a great project. I guess more generally, a more general question for city staff is, are there any other proposed developments in the pipeline for these PD 40 plots?
There aren't any other at this time.
Okay. No, that's all. Thank you.
And Russ, I haven't answered your question on the height. It's 24'6". Emma just looked it up on her phone.
Okay.
Any additional questions?
Oh, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I want to echo Commissioner Vu's comments. I think one of the reasons we haven't seen these properties developed is they're so difficult. These are very, very difficult to develop sites. So kudos to your architect. That was, I'm sure, no easy feat. But by that same token, it's not just difficult to design from an architectural perspective. They're also going to be very difficult to lease up. So I'm really excited that you are proposing to be one of your own tenants. I'm excited that you are a resident of the city, and I feel that increases your commitment to making this project pencil. And I would encourage you to look now at your proposed rental rates for the residential, as well as potential tenants for your coffee shop, because it's a great idea, but it can be very, very difficult, and some of our retailers have struggled, honestly. And so I really want this project to succeed, so I think if you go into it having a really good sense of what your business plan is going to be on that back end, I think that'll increase your potential to succeed. But thank you again wholeheartedly developing that really critical site at a critical location with a really great progressive design and development. So that's all that I have as far as comments. I'll entertain additional I will close the public hearing. Thank you, you can have a seat. And then I will entertain discussion or motions from my fellow commissioners.
My only comment on this, and the reason I asked for the height, is the PD 40 development guidelines and standards. They seem maybe a little bit dated, and maybe we could refresh them, or at some point, maybe we can have staff, once we have an opportunity, refresh those. That was it. And it was, one of those was the heights of the buildings. I thought, especially that single-story 12-foot, what can you do with that? That might be a little bit of a restriction, so. Just one of the things that caught my attention, but otherwise, I think it is a great project. I wish you all the best. I'm not moving it again. Somebody else has to.
A motion to approve.
I have a motion from Commissioner Lepore
I'll second.
and a second from Commissioner Liebig. All those in favor say aye.
Chair Austin,
Oh,
may I
yes.
request, I'm sorry, may I request a roll call on all public hearing items, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, so roll call vote. Clerk, please.
Commissioner Lepore, what is your vote?
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Castillo, what is your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Vu, what is your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Liebig, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Chairperson Austin, what is your vote?
Aye.
We have unanimous ayes.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal with the city clerk within 15 days of tonight's action, and that appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
Thank you very much. We're moving on to item 6, public hearing regarding the Bridge District Phase 4 tentative subdivision map 5128.
And I actually live within 500 feet of this project, so I have to recuse myself.
Thank you, Commissioner Lepore. We'll see you
Have
at
a
the next meeting.
Great evening.
Ms. Allen?
Good evening, Chair Austin and members of the commission. This project is a tentative subdivision map to subdivide 8 lots totaling approximately 2.4 acres into 15 lots. Those lots would be used for 11 single-family townhomes, 2 lots with 3 condo units on each lot, and a lot for a 69-unit apartment complex, and 1 lot would remain vacant at this time. The project is located in the Bridge District, and it's located south of the Park Moderns and Habitat southeast and southwest. The parcels would range in size from 1,612 square feet to a little over 37,000 square feet. The proposed townhome and condo units are proposed to be located on either side of Central Street, while the apartment complex is proposed to front on Riverfront Street. This project design review was submitted at the same time as the tentative map. Staff has concluded design review and approved the applicant's designs for the project. Staff did thoroughly analyze the parking requirements for this project to make sure that it complies with the Bridge District regulations. Each townhome and each condo unit each has 2 parking spaces and thus complies with the required number of spaces for those. For the apartment complex, there are 69 units, which are all either studio or 1 bedroom, so they each require 1 space each. The applicant has provided those thusly. There's 59 spaces that will be located either in the parking garage or in surface parking to the rear of the building. They are required to have 7 guest spaces. Those can be provided by on-street parking. That leaves the remaining 10 spaces, which can be provided in the city's owned lot, which is located at the northeast corner of Bridge and 5th Street. A slight correction I'd like to make to the staff report. When we did the analysis of the Prop 1C calculations for the number of units, we inadvertently left off the 980 Central Apartments, which has 55 units in it, so the applicant's remaining number of units that they would be required to produce on their final lot, instead of being 99, is actually 44. You did receive a memo from me regarding item number 13, which is an engineering condition. The condition has been modified to allow the private road agreement to be incorporated into the CC&Rs for the project. That makes the item consistent with the way it was written when we did Phase 2. And if you need more information on that, Mark Collier from Development Engineering is here, and he could give you further information on it. That concludes my presentation. The applicant is in the audience. I know they have a presentation for you. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them either now or later. And we are recommending approval of the item.
Great, thank you very much, Ms. Allen. So the applicant, do you have a presentation, or do you have one prepared in case we have additional questions? You are not compelled to make a presentation.
They have a PowerPoint for you.
Chair Austin, if you'd open the public hearing at this point.
Opening the public hearing.
Good evening. My name is Louis Kaufman. I'm an architect with HGA Architects in Sacramento. We are a design consultant to this project, and we are partnering with Cushman Architects as the architect of record based out of Sacramento. Phil Harvey is here representing Cushman. We're going to make a brief presentation on this project, largely about design of the project, just for your information as you consider this item. As staff indicated, we're proposing a project which includes an apartment building on Riverfront Street, two 3-unit condominium buildings that anchor the corners of Mill Street and Central Street, and then a series of row houses which flank Central Street, leading back into the Park Moderns, which are existing today. Who's running the PowerPoint? I can do it. Thank you. With this?
Just scroll.
Just scroll. Oh. So this is the opposite side of Central Street. I was just describing that. There are the row houses there, and then the 3-unit condominium building. And then this is an aerial of the project that is proposed. So I want to talk a little bit about the goals for the project, and then talk about the strategy that we've implemented in meeting those goals. So Fulcrum Property essentially identified 3 primary goals. To continue the development of high-quality housing in a mixed blend on this site. Secondly, to begin to address the transformation of the Bridge District as it moves south toward a more higher use that's going to be commercial and higher density as it approaches the freeway. And third, to continue to develop architecture that responds directly to open space. I think that that's a strong feature of the Bridge District, and obviously with the park in the middle of the Park Moderns, that sets the anchor for the entire district and the tone for it. So we proceeded with developing 3 separate building types, which you can see in this view. An L-shaped apartment building that faces the corner of Riverfront and Mill Street, and then as you can see, the 2 flanking buildings that are the 3-unit condominium buildings, and then the row houses leading back into the park. So key conditions here. As we move south, you can see that the scale of these buildings is changing distinctly, specifically with the apartment building. That building, after a number of studies, we determined would be best if it was of a larger scale than the other buildings that have been currently developed in the Bridge District, because it is moving toward buildings that we anticipate will be of quite large scale. So it's a transitional building. It's also a building that's beginning to address Riverfront Street as a frontal, in a frontal relationship. You don't see it in this image. It's actually under construction in this older image, but the barn is just to the right of this image, and you can see some of the construction trucks there. So that's an orientation piece. There'll be additional development on the riverfront here. But that building, which is an anchoring piece, we saw as an iconic building that needed to be sort of somewhat heroic scale. Again, transitioning to the commercial development. To the left, and I'll go to the next slide, the 2 anchoring buildings are similar to the Park Modern buildings, which anchor the each ends of Garden Street. You can see now the barn site up at the top of the slide, and the 2 larger multi-unit buildings that flank the entrance into the park. This is a similar consideration for us as we enter into Central Street from Mill Street. So coming from the right, we're entering into the district and going into a smaller scale housing. So we have 2 buildings which are transitional between the smaller row houses and the large apartment building. And then we have a series of row houses which are consistent with the scale of the Park Moderns. What's not shown in this slide is the existing development today of the Eames Walk project, which is to the north of the Park Moderns. But again, that relates back to the row houses. So you can see what we're trying to do is develop a certain variety of scale of architecture as we move around the block, responding to different site conditions. That was an important consideration for us. So now I'll go to some of the images of the site, seeing it from a street level. So, oops, wrong mouse, pardon me. This is a street level view of the building that's the apartment building anchoring Riverfront Street, which is on the right, and Mill, which is on the left. And then you can see the 3-unit condominium building to the left. So specifically, we're interested in developing 3 different buildings, very different in terms of their architectural vocabulary and material, which would be very much like a true urban fabric. So we didn't want a super development that was all one thing. So clearly we have a building which is this apartment building which actually has a very industrial tone. That was quite deliberate. We're trying to reconnect it with the roots of the site, which was industrial. So we looked at a lot of building typologies that were connected to railroads and agriculture. This building here is intended to be clad in a colored corrugated metal with accents of colored plaster. You can see at the center there's an elevator tower, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And then as we move around to the left, we see the corner of Mill and Central, and now we see the condominium building. So this building is actually a very unique building for the district. It's the first of its typology, which is a parking underneath, and then 3 single-level units above that. They're intended to be focused on a high-end demographic. This core that you're looking at here, white, would have a stair and an elevator tower, and the elevator would stop at each floor, and each floor would be an individual unit. And then as we move around down Central Street, now we're looking at the row houses, and we look carefully at row houses in cities such as Boston or New York, somewhat in San Francisco, and we're looking at classic brick row house typology, but transforming it for the Bridge District. So I'll begin to talk a little about the interface between these buildings and the street. We talked about the primacy of open space and the relationship to the outdoors that's been evident in all of the development in the Bridge District. These row houses have small patio entry spaces off of the street behind the wall that you can see, which is a low concrete wall. So each residence has a small patio there. There's a covered entry, and what's screened by the trees is actually an upper level terrace. These are 3 levels, very consistent with the row houses that are already existing in the Bridge District. So the ground level is garage and a small habitable space that would be used as a study and entry, and then the second level is all living space, and the third level is sleeping. On that second level, there's a terrace that looks out over the street. Back on Riverfront, this is one of the major features of the entire block. What we've done is we've taken this building and opened it up and created a series of open-air terraces on each level of the project. You can see them here. I'd use the pointer, but you wouldn't see it. You're looking at your screen. There's a main entry, which is a lobby secure off the street, and then directly above that is a large open public terrace that all the residents of the building would utilize. And then above that, there are 2 smaller terraces of varying sizes on each level. So a series of open-air porches that are looking out over the river and activating against the street. And then finally, after a lot of study, what we've developed along the front of the building is something we're calling a porch, sort of an industrial porch. So it's an elevated piece. You can see the yellow chairs, which is actually intended to be more of a community space. So people could sit there in the evening, during the day, and collect both residents and potentially people that are residents of the community. There's some active spaces like a bocce court, potentially one of the pitching sandbag things. What's that called?
Cornhole.
Thank you. Cornhole at the other end. But again, trying to open up this idea of the building not just being a closed-in space, but in fact very porous and open. And I think that's the end of our images. The only thing that I'll take you back to is that on this side of the project, actually I'll take you back to the plan. So here, I just want to point out, if you look back at the river side of the project, and you can see that aperture, which I was just describing as a series of open-air porches. The back side of the apartment building, which you can see there, is actually another aperture. So you're looking through We intentionally created sort of a channel, a visual channel that connects the building back through, and then there's a slot between the condominium building and the row house. So in fact, from Central Street, you can stand there and you can look back through between the condominiums and the row house, and then through the apartment building and on beyond to the city and the riverfront beyond. We felt that was a really important connection visually for people as they move through the district. I can talk a bit about more materials if you'd like, some details, but that's pretty much the overview of our presentation.
Thank you very much for that presentation. You can actually have a seat, but don't go far. We're going to have my fellow commissioners have questions and comments. I'll start with Commissioner Liebig.
Thank you. I actually don't have many comments or questions. I think it's a great project. I was curious, the area in between the row houses and the apartments that is currently left open, what is intended for that space? Oh, sorry.
We can bring back up the site, but maybe I can do that real quickly. Right, that's, so here. So,
Thank you.
typically, on a project like this where we're trying to achieve the required density, we would typically do one single building, and you'd have a parking podium. You'd have a podium, and you'd have all underground parking. So on the ground level, you'd have all covered parking, and then you'd have this sort of elevated plaza. And one of the key strategies for this project was to maintain that entire interior space at grade. So it's used for parking, but it's actually heavily landscaped between the parking spaces and then between the driveway that is the back of the row houses and the back of the condominium, there's a grove of trees that'll be planted along there. So the intent is that there's an open space, which is more garden-like, definitely cars in there, but more garden-like than parking lot-like, and certainly not like a conventional podium for an apartment building.
Why did you choose to have two driveways with parking in the middle?
Right.
As opposed to one driveway with, well, and then you could have more greenery, for example?
I think I'm going to actually deflect that to be a more of a legal issue in terms of right-of-way with respect to the different properties and providing access to them. We wanted to make sure that the apartment building had its own dedicated access to all of the parking, and it didn't share access with the row houses and the condominiums, which are private properties. So I think it's more of a legal point. We did explore that, but it actually turns into sort of a fairly large, confusing array of parking and sort of like how you act it, because you actually have to get into the building from this. So if I talk about the apartment driveway, we have access points for trash trucks and things like that coming to the building, and it puts them out remote next to the row houses. And so we were trying to avoid that as well. So there's a number of issues there that kind of govern that decision. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Commissioner Vu.
A couple of questions. What are the plans for Lot 1? My understanding is that it's empty right now. It's not being planned. There are no plans for its use, but I was wondering if there.
It'll likely be residential.
Can you introduce yourself and your affiliation? Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name is Gurjeet Tour. I'm with Fulcrum Property, and Lot 1 will most likely be a residential apartment building in the future. We're building and developing slowly and making sure that what we develop meets the market demands.
Great. And second question is, at this point, have any units been allocated for affordable housing?
So our affordable housing was met with the Bridge Housing Project, and I believe by building that, it allowed us for us to build 400 or 500 market rate units.
Got it. Thank you.
Commissioner Castillo.
I don't have any questions.
Thank you. I don't have any questions either. Thank you to the developer and the team. This looks like a great project and be a nice addition to the Bridge District. And with that, I'll turn it over for additional discussion or a motion from my fellow commissioner. Oh, I'm sorry.
Close the public hearing, please.
Yes, I apologize. There is one public comment from Mari Helmer.
So I live in the townhouse which will be lot one will be right behind me. So the main things I'd like to ask is, I read over this 17 pages one is it 69 apartments or 78 apartments? Because attachment 3 writes both 78 on top in the paragraph, then 69 below. So that should be clarified on attachment. I think it's a typo, but I think it should be clarified. The second one is on page 2, there is made mention a homeowners association. Will this homeowners association be strictly for phase 4? Because there is a provision there wherein the alleyways will be turned over to the homeowners association for us to maintain. So is this strictly for phase 4 homeowners, or does this have to be for phase 1 to, there's no 3, right? So this would this include also the Park
Extend
Moderns,
beyond
the
phase
Habitat?
4, right.
Or is it just phase 4? Because that has legal repercussions for us. So because we didn't know about this alleyway, so I just want that clarified. The next thing I'd like to ask is, if you would look at, I listened to your report wherein you said that it says here the remainder of the developer's obligation of the 386 market units would be 99 units. However, you said earlier that this was a mistake and it is 44 units. However, I did the math here. 386 minus all of this developer spaces, because the phase 2 apartments is already here. So 386 less the 36 of the Park Moderns, including the units that have two units, including the 96 Habitat, 21 phase 2 homes, 55 apartments, 1169, 6 is 92 units. So can we have a clarification if it is indeed 99 or 44 or 92?
So I think actually if,
could you just do a little math to explain to me? I'm just a simple substitute
I believe that she
teacher.
said that something that was not included was the apartment building, is that correct?
It's here in phase 2 apartments, 55. So is there an additional? 386, less 36, less 96, less 21, less phase 2 apartments, 55, unless there's an additional.
The River Mark is not included, I believe, is that correct?
It's the 980 Central Apartments, which are actually currently under construction,
thank you.
that was inadvertently
That's
left
the
off.
phase 2 apartments, right? The 55, excuse me. Could you answer this? This 55 is already here, okay? Right?
I would encourage you to request that we accept public comment, close it, and then we can respond.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And also, I think we're over the 3-minute limit as well.
But because it's
Right, so you've,
mathematical,
I
so
think
those were the.
you've identified what your questions are. Do you have
the
additional
three
questions?
Yes,
Okay,
and the last one is, are you sure about the one-to-one space parking for these apartments? That's my only question.
Great, thank you very much. So I think, do city staff have some additional responses? Because I can also turn it over to the applicant, but I'll start with city staff responses to any of her questions.
In terms of the one-to-one parking, I'm assuming she's meaning the number of spaces calculated for the apartment complex, and we did those calculations based on the numbers in an urban area as listed in the zoning ordinance, and that apartment complex does require 69 parking spaces plus 7 guest parking spaces.
Yeah, and that's based on them being studios and one-bedrooms. If they were larger bedroom counts, there would be additional parking required.
All right, thank you very much for clarifying. Does the applicant want to come forward, or representative from the applicant come forward and respond to some of the questions from the resident?
Thank you, Maury, for your questions. Yes, the first question was regarding the typo. There was a typo in our statement of information. 69 is the correct number of units that we're proposing for the apartment building. If we could put the presentation on, I can go over the alleyway, but the short
I'm
answer.
sorry, yeah, if you could speak into the microphone. I know you're trying to be polite and look at her, but yeah.
For the CCNRs and the homeowners association is not going to affect any of the existing homes that have been built and sold. I believe it was incorrectly maybe called an alleyway, but it's basically the driveway that runs behind the homes, and that is going to have the homeowners association and CCNRs that govern the maintenance for that. And the third question was in regards to the Prop 1C unit count. I think one of the items that we included in there was our Phase 3 development, for which we've submitted a design review application. And that kind of helps clarify some of the math. So the chart is right up there.
Okay, great, thank you very much. All right, so any additional responses from commissioners? At this point, I will close the public hearing. Turn it over to additional discussion or a motion, or entertain a motion from my fellow commissioners.
I'll go ahead and move for approval, to approve the requested tentative subdivision map, subject to the conditions and findings as identified in this report.
I have a motion from Commissioner Castillo.
I'll second with the amended text for condition of approval number 13.
So we have a motion with an amendment that has been made by Commissioner Castillo and a second by Commissioner Liebig. And since it's a public hearing, we'd like to request a roll call vote.
Yes, please.
Commissioner Castillo, what is your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Vu, what is your vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Liebig, what is your vote?
Aye.
And Chairperson Austin, what is your vote?
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
Any interested party may appeal the decision of the Planning Commission in this matter to the City Council by filing a written appeal, the city clerk within 10 days of tonight's action, and that appeal must be accompanied by the appropriate filing fee.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to general administrative function, Part A, informal discussion. Seeing none, I will seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.